God-given prophecy is history in advance. Church history is his story of Jesus building his church in the world from his place seated at the right hand of the Father in providence. The History of Protestantism by James A. Wiley is perhaps one of the most complete chronicles of that history. Thank you for joining me. We will continue right where we left off last time. When the command of the superior goes forth, the person to whom it is directed is not to say till he has finished the letter his pen is tracing, says the Constitution. He must give instant compliance, so that holy obedience may be perfect in us in every point, in execution, in will, in intellect. Obedience is styled the tomb of the will, a blessed blindness which causes the soul to see the road to salvation, and the members of the society are taught to immolate their will as a sheep is sacrificed. The Jesuit is to be in the hands of his superior, as the axe in the hands of the woodcutter, or as the staff in the hands of an old man, which serves him wherever and in whatever thing he is pleased to use it. In fine, the constitutions enjoin that they who live under obedience shall permit themselves to be moved and directed under divine providence by their superiors, just as if they were a corpse, which allows itself to be moved and handled in any way. The annals of mankind do not furnish another example of a despotism so finished. We know of no other instance in which the members of the body are so numerous, or the ramifications so wide, and yet the centralization and cohesion so perfect. We have traced at some length the long and severe discipline which every member must undergo before being admitted into the select class that by way of eminence constitute the society. Before arriving on the threshold of the inner circle of Jesuitism, 3 times has the candidate passed through that terrible ordeal, first as a novice, secondly as a scholar, thirdly as a coadjutor. Is his training held to be complete when he is admitted among the professed? No. A 4th time he must undergo the same dreadful process. He is thrown back again into the crucible, and kept amid its fires, till pride and obstinacy and self-will and love of ease, till judgment, soul, and conscience have been purged out of him. And then he comes forth, fully refined, completely tempered and hardened, a vessel fully fitted for the use of his general, prepared to execute with a conscience that never remonstrates his most terrible command, and to undertake with a will that never rebels the most difficult and dangerous enterprise he may assign him. In the words of an eloquent writer, talk of drilling and discipline, why, the drilling and the discipline which gave to Alexander the men that marched in triumph from Macedon to the Indus, to Caesar the men that marched in triumph from Rome, to the wilds of Caledonia, to Hannibal the men that marched in triumph from Carthage to Rome, to Napoleon the men whose achievements surpassed in brilliance the united glories of the soldiers of Macedon, of Carthage, and of Rome, to Wellington, the men who smote into dust the very flower of Napoleon's chivalry, why the drilling and the discipline of all these combined cannot, in point of stern, rigid, and protracted severity, for a moment be compared to the drilling and discipline which fitted and molded men for becoming full members of the militant institute of the Jesuits. Such, Loyola saw, was the corps that was needed to confront the armies of Protestantism and turn back the advancing tide of light and liberty. Touched with a divine fire, the disciples of the gospel attained at once to a complete renunciation of self and a magnanimity of soul which enabled them to brave all dangers and endure all sufferings, and to bear the standard of a recovered gospel over deserts and oceans, in the midst of hunger and pestilence, of dungeons and racks and fiery stakes. It was vain to think of overcoming warriors like these. unless by combatants of an equal temper and spirit, and Loyola set himself to fashion such. He could not clothe them with the panoply of light. He could not inspire them with that holy and invincible courage which springs from faith, nor could he so enkindle their souls with the love of the Savior and the joys of the life eternal, as that they should despise the sufferings of time. But he could give them their counterfeits. He could enkindle them with a fanaticism, inspire them with a Luciferian ambition, and so pervert and indurate their souls by evil maxims and long and rigorous training, that they should be insensible to shame and pain, and would welcome suffering and death. Such are the weapons of the men he sent forth to the battle. Chapter 4. Moral Code of the Jesuits. Probabilism, etc. The Jesuit cut off from country, from family, from property, from the Pope even. The end sanctifies the means. The first great commandment and Jesuit morality. When may a man love God? Second great commandment. Doctrine of Probabilism. The Jesuit casuist. Pascal. The direction of the intention. Illustrative cases furnished by Jesuit doctors. Marvelous virtue of the doctrine. A pious assassination. We have not yet surveyed the full and perfect equipping of those troops which Loyola sent forth to prosecute the war against Protestantism. Nothing was left unthought of and unprovided for which might assist them in covering their opponents with defeat and crowning themselves with victory. They were set free from every obligation, whether imposed by the natural or the divine law. Every stratagem, artifice, and disguise was lawful to men in whose favor all distinction concerning right and wrong had been abolished. They might assume as many shapes as Proteus and exhibit as many colors as the chameleon. They stood apart and alone amongst the human race. First of all, they were cut off from country. Their vow bound them to go to whatever land their general might send them, and to remain there as long as he might appoint. Their country was the society. They were cut off from family and friends. Their vow taught them to forget their father's house, and to esteem themselves holy only when every affection and desire which nature had planted in their breasts had been plucked up by the roots. They were cut off from property and wealth. For although the society was immensely rich, its individual members possessed nothing, nor could they cherish the hope of ever becoming personally wealthy, seeing they had taken a vow of perpetual poverty. It chanced that a rich relative died and left them his heirs. The general received them of their vow, and sent them back into the world for so long a time as might enable them to take possession of the wealth of which they had been named the heirs. But this done, they returned laden with their booty, and resumed their vow as Jesuits, laid every penny of their newly acquired riches at the feet of the general. They were cut off, moreover, from the state. They were discharged from all civil and national relationships and duties. They were under a higher code than any national one. The institutions, namely, which Loyola had edited and the Spirit of God had inspired, and they were the subjects of a higher monarch than the sovereign of the nation, their own general, nay, more. The Jesuits were cut off even from the Pope, for if their general held the place of the omnipotent God, much more did he hold the place of his vicar, and so it was in fact, for soon the members of the Society of Jesus came to recognize no laws but their own. And though at their first formation they professed to have no end but the defense and glory of the papal see, it came to pass, when they grew to be strong, that, instead of serving the tiara, They compelled the tiara to serve the society, and made their own wealth, power, and dominion the one grand object of their existence. They were a papacy within the papacy, a papacy whose organization was more perfect, whose instincts were more cruel, whose workings were more mysterious, and whose dominion was more destructive than that of the old papacy. So stood the Society of Jesus. A deep and wide gulf separated it from all other communities and interests. Set free from the love of family, from the ties of kindred, from the claims of country, from the rules of law, careless of the happiness they might destroy, and the misery and pain and woe they might inflict, the members were at liberty, without control or challenge, to pursue their terrible end, which was the dethronement of every other power, the extinction of every other interest but their own, and the reduction of mankind into abject slavery, that on the ruins of the liberty, the virtue, and the happiness of the world they might raise themselves to a supreme unlimited dominion. But we have not yet detailed all the device with which the Jesuits were careful to furnish themselves for the execution of their unspeakably audacious and diabolic design. In the midst of these abysses, there opens to our eye a yet more profound abyss. To enjoy exemption from all human authority and from every earthly law was to them a small matter. Nothing would satisfy their lust for license save the entire abrogation of the moral law, and nothing would appease their pride save to trample underfoot the majesty of heaven. We now come to speak of the moral code of the Jesuits. The keynote of their ethical code is the famous maxim that the end sanctifies the means. Before that maxim, the eternal distinction of right and wrong vanishes. Not only do the stringency and sanctions of human law dissolve and disappear, but the authority and majesty of the Decalogue are overthrown. There is no conceivable crime, villainy, and atrocity which this maxim will not justify. Nay, such become dutiful and holy, provided they be done for the greater glory of God, by which the Jesuit means the honor, interest, and advancement of his society. In short, the Jesuit may do whatever he has a mind to do, all human and divine laws notwithstanding. This is a very grave charge, but the evidence of its truth is, unhappily, too abundant, and the difficulty lies in making a selection. What the popes have attempted to do by the plenitude of their power, namely to make sin to be no sin, the Jesuit doctors have done by their casuistry. The first and great commandment in the law, said the divine person who proclaimed it from Sinai, is to love the Lord thy God. The Jesuit casuists have set men free from the obligation to love God. Escobar collects the different sentiments of the famous divines of the Society of Jesus upon the question, when is a man obliged to have actually an affection for God? The following are some of these. Suarez says, it is sufficient that a man love him before he dies, not assigning any particular time. Vasquez, that it is sufficient even at the point of death. Others, when a man receives his baptism. Others, when he is obliged to be contrite. Others, upon holidays. But our father, Castro Paleo, disputes all these opinions, and that justly. Hurtado de Mendoza pretends that a man is obliged to do it once every year. Our father Koenig believes a man to be obliged once in 3 or 4 years. Henriquez, once in 5 years. But Filiutius affirms it to be probable that in rigor a man is not obliged every 5 years. When then? He leaves the point to the wise. We are not, says Father Sermond, so much commanded to love him as to not hate him. Thus do the Jesuit theologians make void the first and great commandment in the law. The second commandment in the law is, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. The second great commandment meets with no more respect at the hands of the Jesuits than the first. Their morality dashes both tables of the law in pieces. Charity to man it makes void equally with the love of God. The methods by which this may be done are innumerable. The first of these is termed Probabilism. This is a device which enables a man to commit any act, be it ever so manifest a breach of the moral and divine law, without the least restraint of conscience, remorse of mind, or guilt before God. What is Probabilism? By way of answer, we shall suppose that a man has a great mind to do a certain act, of the lawfulness of which he is in doubt. He finds that there are two opinions on the point, the one probably true, to the effect that the act is lawful, the other more probably true, to the effect that the act is sinful. Under the Jesuit regimen, the man is at liberty to act upon the probable opinion. The act is probably right, but more probably wrong. Nevertheless, he is safe in doing it, in virtue of the doctrine of probabilism. It is important to ask what makes an opinion probable. To make an opinion probable, a Jesuit finds easy indeed. If a single doctor has pronounced in its favor, though a corps of doctors may have condemned it, or if the man can imagine in his own mind something like a tolerable reason for doing the act, the opinion that it is lawful becomes probable. It will be hard to name an act for which a Jesuit authority may not be produced, and harder still to find a man whose invention is so poor as to not furnish him with what he deems a good reason for doing what he is inclined to do, and therefore it may be pronounced impossible to instance a deed, however manifestly opposed to the light of nature and the law of God, which may not be committed under the shield of the monstrous dogma of probabilism. We are neither indulging in satire nor incurring the charge of bearing false witness. In this picture of Jesuit theology, a person may do what he considers allowable, says Emmanuel Say, of the Society of Jesus, according to a probable opinion, although the contrary may be the more probable one. The opinion of a single grave doctor is all that is requisite. A yet greater doctor, Phileutius of Rome, confirms him in this. It is allowable, says he, to follow the less probable opinion, even though it be the less safe one. That is the common judgment of modern authors. Of two contrary opinions, says Paul Layman, touching the legality or illegality of any human action, every one may follow in practice or in action that which he should prefer, although it may appear to the agent himself less probable in theory. He adds, a learned person may give contrary advice to different persons according to contrary probable opinions, whilst he still preserves discretion and prudence. Same action a sin, or these Jesuit casuists give us elbow room at all events. It is and it is not is the motto of this theology. It is the true lesbian rule which shapes itself according to that which we wish to measure it by. Would we have any action to be sinful, the Jesuit moralist turns this side of the code to us. Would we have it to be lawful, he turns the other side. Right and wrong are put thus in our own power. We can make the same action a sin or a duty as we please, or as we deem it expedient. To steal the property, slander the character, violate the chastity, or spill the blood of a fellow creature is most probably wrong. But let us imagine some good to be got by it, and it is probably right. The Jesuit writers, for the sake of those who are dull of understanding and slow to apprehend the freedom they bring them, have gone into particulars and compiled a list of actions esteemed sinful, unnatural, and abominable by the moral sense of all nations hitherto, but which, in virtue of this new morality, are no longer so. And they have explained how these actions may be safely done, with a minuteness of detail and a luxuriance of illustration, in which it were tedious in some cases, immodest in others, to follow them. One would think that this was license enough, What more can the Jesuit need? Or what more can he possibly have, seeing by a little effort of invention he can overleap every human and divine barrier, and commit the most horrible crimes on the mightiest possible scale, and neither feel remorse of conscience nor fear of punishment. But this unbounded liberty of wickedness did not content the sons of Loyola. They panted for a liberty, if possible, yet more boundless. They wished to be released from the easy condition of imagining some good end for the wickedness they wished to perpetrate, and to be free to sin without the trouble of assigning even to themselves any end at all. This they have accomplished by the method of directing the intention. This is a new ethical science, unknown to those ages which were not privileged to bask in the illuminating rays of the Society of Jesus, and it is as simple as convenient. It is the soul, they argue, that does the act, so far as it is moral or immoral. As regards the body's share in it, neither virtue nor vice can be predicated of it. If, therefore, while the hand is shedding blood, or the tongue is calumniating character, or uttering a falsehood, the soul can so abstract itself from what the body is doing as to occupy itself the while with some holy theme, or fix its meditation on some benefit or advantage likely to arise from the deed, which it knows, or at least suspects, the body is at that moment engaged in doing. The soul contracts neither guilt nor stain, and the man runs no risk of ever being called to account for the murder, or theft, or calumny, by God, or of incurring his displeasure on that ground. We are not satirizing. We are simply stating the morality of the Jesuits. We never, says Father Jesuit in Pascal's letters, suffer such a thing as the formal intention to sin with the sole design of sinning. If any person whatever should persist in having no other end but evil in the evil that he does, we break with him at once. Such conduct is diabolical. This holds true without exception of age, sex, or rank. But when the person is not of such a wretched disposition as this, we try to put in practice our method of directing the intention, which simply consists in his proposing to himself, as the end of his actions, some allowable object. Not that we do not endeavor, as far as we can, to dissuade men from doing things forbidden. But when we cannot prevent the action, we at least purify the motive, and thus correct the viciousness of the means by the goodness of the end. Such is the way in which our fathers of the Society have contrived to permit those acts of violence to which men usually resort in vindication of their honor. They have no more to do than turn off the intention from the desire of vengeance, which is criminal, and to direct it to a desire to defend their honor, which, according to us, is quite warrantable. And in this way our doctors discharge all their duty towards God and towards man. By permitting the action, they gratify the world, and by purifying the intention, they give satisfaction to the gospel. This is a secret, sir, which was entirely unknown to the ancients. The world is indebted for the discovery entirely to our doctors. You understand it now, I hope. Let us take a few illustrative cases, but only such as the Jesuit casuists themselves have furnished. A military man, says Reginald, may demand satisfaction on the spot from the person who has injured him, not indeed with the intention of rendering evil for evil, but with that of preserving his honor. Lessius observes that if a man has received a blow on the face, he must on no account have an intention to avenge himself, but he may lawfully have an intention to avert infamy, and may, with that view, repel the insult immediately, even at the point of the sword. If your enemy is disposed to injure you, says Escobar, you have no right to wish his death by a movement of hatred, though you may save yourself from harm. And says Hurtado de Mendoza, we may pray God to visit with speedy death those who are bent on persecuting us, if there is no other way of escaping from it. An incumbent, says Gaspar de Hurtado, may without any mortal sin desire the decease of a life renter on his benefice, and a son that of a father, and rejoice when it happens, provided always it is for the sake of the profit that is to accrue from the event, and not from personal aversion. Sanchez teaches that it is lawful to kill our adversary in a duel, or even privately, when he intends to deprive us of our honor or property unjustly in a lawsuit or by chicanery, and when there is no other way of preserving them. It is equally right to kill in a private way a false accuser and his witness, and even the judge who has been bribed to favor them, a most pious assassination, exclaims Pascal. Chapter 5. Jesuit teaching on regicide, murder, lying, theft, etc. The maxims of the Jesuits on regicide, M. de Chalateus, report to the Parliament at Bretagne. Effects of Jesuit doctrine as shown in history. Doctrine of mental equivocation. The art of swearing falsely without sin. The seventh commandment. Jesuit doctrine on blasphemy, murder, lying, theft, an illustrative case from Pascal. Every precept of the Decalogue made void. Jesuit morality, the consummation of the wickedness of the fall. The three great rules of the Code of the Jesuits, which we have stated in the foregoing chapter, namely, 1. That the end justifies the means. 2. That it is safe to do any action if it be probably right, although it may be probably wrong. And 3. That if one knows how to redirect his intention, there is no deed which one may not do, regardless of its morality, all which may seem to give a license of acting so immense that to add thereto were an altogether superfluous and indeed an impossible task. But if the liberty with which these three maxims endow the Jesuit cannot be made larger, its particular applications may nevertheless be made more pointed, and the man who holds back from using it in all its extent may be emboldened, despite his remaining scruples, or the dullness of his intellectual perceptions, to avail himself to the utmost of the advantages it offers, for the greater glory of God. He is taught to be, not merely by general rules, but by specific examples, how he may sin and yet not become sinful, how he may break the law and yet not suffer the penalty. But further, these sons of Loyola are the kings of the world, and the sole heirs of all its wealth, honors, and pleasures, and whatever law, custom, sacred and venerable office, august and kingly authority may stand between them and their rightful lordship over mankind, they are at liberty to throw down and tread into the dust as a vile and accursed thing. The moral maxims of the Jesuits are to be put in force against kings as well as against peasants. The lawfulness of killing the excommunicated, the Protestant, and kings, the Jesuit writers have been at great pains to maintain, and by a great variety of arguments to defend and enforce. The proof is as abundant as it is painful. M. de Chalateus reports to the Parliament at Bretagne, as a result of his examination of the laws and doctrines of the Jesuits, that on this point there is a complete and startling unanimity in their teaching. By the same logical track do the whole host of Jesuit writers arrive at the same terrible conclusion, the slaughter, namely, of the sovereign on whom the Pope has pronounced sentence of removal. If he shall take meekly his extrusion from power, and seek neither to resist nor revenge his being hurled from his throne, his life may be spared. But should he persist in disobedience, says Chalateus, himself a papist, and addressing a popish parliament, he may be treated as a tyrant, in which case anybody may kill him. Such is the course of reasoning established by all authors of the Society who have written ex professo on these subjects: Bellarmine, Suarez, Molina, Mariana, Santarell, all the ultramontanes without exception, since the establishment of the Society. But have not the writers of this school expressed in no measured terms their abhorrence of murder? Have they not loudly exclaimed against the sacrilege of touching on whom the Church's anointing oil has been poured as king? In short, do they not forbid and condemn the practice of regicide? Yes, this is true, but they protest with a warmth that is fitted to awaken suspicion. Rome can take back her anointing, and when she has stripped the monarch of his office, he becomes the lawful victim of her consecrated dagger. On what grounds, the Jesuits demand, can the killing of one who is no longer a king be called regicide? Suarez tells us that when a king is deposed, he is no longer to be regarded as a king, but as a tyrant. He therefore loses his authority, and from that moment may be lawfully killed. Nor is the opinion of the Jesuit Mariana less decided. Speaking of a prince, he says, if he should overthrow the religion of the country, and introduce a public enemy within the state, I shall never consider that man to have done wrong who, favoring the public wishes, would attempt to kill him. It is useful that princes should be made to know that if they oppress the state and become intolerable by their vices and their pollution, they hold their lives upon this tenure. That to put them to death is not only laudable, but a glorious action. It is a glorious thing to exterminate this pestilent and mischievous race from the community of men. Wherever the Jesuits have planted missions, opened seminaries, and established colleges, they have been careful to include these principles in the minds of the youth, thus sowing the seeds of future tumults, revolutions, regicides, and wars. These evil fruits have appeared sometimes sooner, sometimes later, but they never failed to show themselves, to the grief of nations and the dismay of kings. John Chattel, who tempted the life of Henry IV, had studied in the College of Claremont, in which the Jesuit Guinard was professor of divinity. In the chamber of the would-be regicide, a manuscript of Guinard was found, in which, besides other dangerous articles, that father approved not only of the assassination of Henry III by Clement, but also maintained that the same thing ought to be attempted against Le Bernois, as he called Henry IV, which occasioned the first banishment of the order out of France, as a society detestable and diabolical. The sentence of the Parliament, passed in 1594, ordained that all the priests and scholars of the College of Claremont, and others calling themselves the Society of Jesus, as being corrupters of youth, disturbers of the public peace, and enemies of the king and state, should depart in 3 days from their house and college, and in 15 days out of the whole kingdom. But why should we dwell on these written proofs of the disloyal and murderous principles of the Jesuits, when their acted deeds bear still more emphatic testimony to the true nature and effects of their principles? We have only to look around, and on every hand the melancholy monuments of these doctrines meet our afflicted sight. To what country of Europe shall we turn where we are not able to track the Jesuit by his bloody footprints? What page of modern history shall we open and not read fresh proofs that the papal doctrine of killing excommunicated kings was not meant to slumber in forgotten tomes, but to be acted out in the living world? We see Henry III falling by their dagger. Henry IV perishes by the same consecrated weapon. The King of Portugal dies by their order. The great Prince of Orange is dispatched by their agent, shot down at the door of his own dining room. How many assassins they sent to England to murder Elizabeth, history attests. That she escaped their machinations is one of the marvels of history, nor is it only the palaces of monarchs into which they have crept with their doctrines of murder and assassination. The very sanctuary of their own popes they have defiled with blood. We behold Clement XIV signing the order for the banishment of the Jesuits, and soon thereafter he is overtaken by their vengeance and dies by poison. In the Gunpowder Plot, we see them deliberately planning to destroy at one blow the nobility and gentry of England. To them we owe those civil wars which for so many years drenched with blood the fair provinces of France. They laid the train of that crowning horror, the St. Bartholomew Massacre. Philip, too, and the Jesuits share between them the guilt of the Invincible Armada, which, instead of inflicting the measureless ruin and havoc which its authors intended, by a most merciful providence, became the means of exhausting the treasuries and overthrowing the prestige of Spain. What a harvest of plots, tumults, seditions, revolutions, torturings, poisonings, assassinations, regicides, and massacres has Christendom reaped from the seed sown by the Jesuits, nor can we be sure that we have yet seen the last and greatest of their crimes. We can be sure that we have not. We can bestow only the most cursory glance at the teaching of the Jesuits under the other heads of moral duty. Let us take their doctrine of mental reservation. Nothing can be imagined more heinous and, at the same time, more dangerous. The doctrine of equivocation, says Blackwell, is for the consolation of afflicted Roman Catholics and the instruction of all the godly. It has been of special use to them when residing among infidels and heretics. In heathen countries, as China and Malabar, they have professed conformity to the rites and the worship of paganism, while remaining Roman Catholics at heart. They have taught their converts to venerate their former deities in appearance, on the strength of directing aright the attention, and the pious fraud of concealing a crucifix under their clothes. Equivocation they have carried into civil life as well as into religious. A man may swear, says Sanchez, that he has not done a thing, though he really have, by understanding within himself that he did it not on such and such a day, or before he was born, or by reflecting on some other circumstance of the like nature, and yet the words he shall make use of shall not have a sense of implying any such thing. And this is a thing of great convenience on many occasions, and is always justifiable when it is necessary or advantageous in anything that concerns a man's health, honor, and estate. Phileutius, in his Moral Questions, asks, is it wrong to use equivocation in swearing? I answer first, that it is not in itself a sin to use equivocation in swearing. This is the common doctrine after Suarez. Is it perjury to sin, to equivocate in a just cause? He further asks. It is not perjury, he answers, as, for example, in the case of a man who has outwardly made a promise without the intention of promising. If he asks whether he has promised, he may deny it, meaning that he has not promised with a binding promise, and thus he may swear. Phileutius asks yet again, with what precaution is equivocation to be used? When we begin, for instance, to say, I swear, we must insert, in a subdued tone, the mental restriction, that today, and then continue, aloud, I have not eaten such a thing, or I swear, then insert I say, then conclude with the same kind of voice, that I have not done this or that thing. For thus the whole speech is most true. What an admirable lesson in the art of speaking the truth to oneself and lying and swearing falsely to everybody else. We shall offer no comment on the teaching of the Jesuits under the head of the Seventh Commandment. The doctrines of the Society which relate to chastity are screened from exposure by the very enormity of their turpitude. We pass them as we would the open grave. whose putrid breath kills all who inhale it. Let all who value the sweetness of a pure imagination and the joy of conscience undefiled shun the confessional as they would the chamber in which the plague is shut up, or the path in which lurks the deadly scorpion. The teaching of the Jesuits, everywhere deadly, is here a poison that consumes flesh and bones and soul. Which precept of the Decalogue is it that the theology of the Jesuits does not set aside? We are commanded to fear the great and dreadful name of the Lord our God. The Jesuit Bonney teaches us to blaspheme it. If one has been hurried by passion into cursing and doing despite to his Maker, it may be determined that he has only sinned venially. This is much, but Casnetti goes a little farther. Do what your conscience tells you to be good, and command, says the Jesuit, if though invincible error you believe lying and blasphemy to be commanded by God, blaspheme. The license given by the Jesuits to regicide we have already seen. Not less ample is the provision their theology makes for the perpetration of ordinary homicide and murders. Reginald says it is lawful to kill a false witness, seeing otherwise one should be killed by him. Parents who seek to turn their children from the faith, says Fagundes, may justly be killed by them. The Jesuit Amicus teaches that it is lawful for an ecclesiastic or one in a religious order to kill a calumniator when other means of defense are wanting. And Hérault extends the same privilege to laymen. If one brings an impeachment before a prince or judge against another, and if the other cannot by any means avert the injury to his character, we may kill him secretly. He fortifies his opinion by the authority of Banez, who gives the same latitude to the right of defense, with this slight qualification: if the calumniator should first be warned that he desist from his slander, and if he will not, he should be killed, not openly on account of the scandal, but secretly. Of a like ample kind is the liberty which the Jesuits permit to be taken with property of one's neighbor. Dishonesty in all its forms they sanction. They encourage cheats, frauds, purloining, robberies, by furnishing men with a ready justification of these misdeeds, and especially by persuading their votaries that if they will only take the trouble of doing them in the way of directing the intention according to their instructions, they need not fear being called to a reckoning for them hereafter. The Jesuit Emmanuel Say teaches that it is not a mortal sin to take secretly from him who would give if he were asked, that it is not theft to take a small thing from a husband or a father, that if one has taken what he doubts to have been his own, that doubt makes it probable that it is safe to keep it, that if one, from an urgent necessity, or without causing much loss, takes wood from another man's pile, he is not obliged to restore it. One who has stolen small things at different times is not obliged to make restitution till such time as they amount together to a considerable sum. But should the purloiner feel restitution burdensome, it may comfort him to know that some fathers deny it without probability. In the case of merchants, whose gains may not be increasing as fast as they could wish, has been kindly considered by the fathers. Francis Tollet says that if a man cannot sell his wine at a fair price, that is, at a fair profit, he may mix a little water with his wine, or diminish his measure, and sell it for pure wine or full measure. Of course, if it be lawful to mix wine, it is lawful to adulterate all other articles of merchandise, or to diminish the weight, and go on vending as if the balance were just and the article genuine. Only the trafficker in spurious goods with false balances must be careful to not tell a lie, or if he should be compelled to equivocate, he must do it in accordance with the rules laid down by the fathers for enabling one to say what is not true without committing falsehood. Domestic servants have also been taken by the fathers under the shield of their casuistry. Should a servant deem his wages not enough, or the food, clothing, and other necessaries provided for him not equal to that which is provided for servants of similar rank in other houses, he may recompense himself by abstracting from his master's property as much as shall make his wages commensurate with his services. So has Valerius Reginald decided. It is fair, however, that the pupil be cautioned that this lesson cannot safely be put into practice against his teacher. The story of John de Alba, related by Pascal, shows that the fathers do not relish these doctrines in praxis nearly well as much as in thesis, when they themselves are the sufferers by them. De Alba was a servant to the fathers in the College of Clermont and the Rue Saint-Jacques, and thinking that his wages were not equal to his merits, he stole somewhat from his masters to make up the discrepancy, never dreaming that they would make a criminal of him for following their approved rules. However, they threw him into prison on a charge of larceny. He was brought to trial on the 16th of April, 1647. He confessed before the court to have taken some pewter plates, but maintained that the act was not to be regarded as theft on the strength of the same doctrine of Father Bonney, which he produced before the judges, with attestation from another of the fathers under whom he had studied these cases of conscience. Whereupon the judge, M. de Montroge, gave sentence as follows: that the prisoner should not be acquitted upon the writings of these fathers, containing a doctrine so unlawful, pernicious, and contrary to all laws, natural, divine, and human, such as might confound all families, and authorize all domestic frauds and infidelities, but that the over-faithful disciple should be whipped before the college gate of Clermont by the common executioner, who at the same time should burn all the writings of those fathers treating of theft, and that they should be prohibited to teach such doctrine again under pain of death. But we should swell beyond all reasonable limits our enumeration were we to quote even a tenth of the moral maxims of the Jesuits. There is not one in the long catalogue of sins and crimes which their casuistry does not sanction. Pride, ambition, avarice, luxury, bribery, and a host of vices which we cannot specify, and some which are too horrible to be mentioned, find in these fathers their patrons and defenders. The alchemists of the Middle Ages boasted that their art enabled them to operate on the essence of things, and to change what was vile into something noble. But the still darker art of the Jesuits acts in the reverse order. It changes all that is noble into all that is vile. Theirs is an accursed alchemy, by which they transmute good into evil, and virtue into vice. There is no destructive agency with which the world is liable to be visited, that penetrates so deep, or inflicts so remediless a ruin, as the morality of the Jesuits. The tornado sweeps along over the surface of the globe, leaving the earth naked and bare as before tree or shrub beautified it. But the following summers reclothe it with verdure and beautify it with flowers, and make it smile as sweetly as before. The earthquake overturns the dwellings of man, and swallows up the proudest of cities. But his skill and power survive the shock, and when the destroyer has passed, the architect sets up again the fallen palace, and rebuilds the mined city, and the catastrophe is effaced and forgotten in the greater splendor and the more solid strength of the restored structures. Revolution may overturn thrones, abolish laws, and break in pieces the framework of society. But when the fury of faction has spent its rage, order emerges from the chaos, law resumes its supremacy, and the institutions which had been destroyed in the hour of madness, are restored in the hour of calm wisdom that succeeds. But the havoc the Jesuit inflicts is irremediable. It has nothing in it counteractive or restorative. It is only evil. It is not upon the works of man or the institutions of man merely that it puts forth its fearfully destructive power. It is upon man himself. It is not the body of man that it strikes, like the pestilence. It is the soul. It is not part, but the whole man that it consigns to corruption and ruin. Conscience it destroys, knowledge it extinguishes, the very power of discerning between right and wrong it takes away, and shuts up the man in a prison where no created agency or influence can set him free. The fall defaced the image of God in which man was made. We say defaced. It did not totally obliterate or extinguish it. Jesuitism, more terrible than the fall, totally effaces from the soul of man the image of God, of the knowledge, righteousness, and true holiness in which man was made. It leaves not a trace. It plucks up by its very roots the moral constitution which God gave man. The full triumph of Jesuitism would leave nothing spiritual, nothing moral, nothing intellectual, and nothing strictly or properly human existing upon the earth. Man it would change into the animal, impelled by nothing but appetites and passions, and these more fierce and cruel than those of the tiger. Society would become simply a herd of wolves, lawless, ravenous, greedy for each other's blood, and perpetually in quest of prey. I wish to express a special thanks to all the supporters of First Amendment Radio and our mission on true prophecy reformation. If you would like to support the work here with a special one-time gift, it would be greatly appreciated. We, however, always prefer an ongoing, faithful gift of support for the labor that continues here always. So please consider carefully how much you are able to continue without undue hardship to your own household. In the least, please like and share and subscribe wherever you are receiving this work. Thank you. Secrets of the Rapture. Is there a 500-year-old conspiracy? A propaganda machine so pervasive and entrenched, yet so elusive that the entire world could be taken in by it, working in plain sight, but unseen by the world for what it truly is? If prophecy is God-given history in advance, why does the prophecy that has conquered the age also exclude nearly 2,000 years of history? What is it that they are afraid that the light of history will reveal? To understand our place in time and prophecy, we must look in history for an interpretation, that which stands the test of time, that which agrees with the Word of God, and history has proven to be true. When cunning fables and fearful speculations are removed from our sight, then we may clearly see what is truly expressed in Bible prophecy, both that which has been fulfilled and that which has yet to come. God's express word is the sword that must be wielded to remove the scales from the eyes and dispel the darkness of deceitful conjecture. Secrets of the Rapture was written to expose that which the spirit of the age has conjured out of the darkness to blind the eyes of the church in the world today. Secrets of the Rapture, Deconstructing Pre-Tribulation Dispensational Futurism by yours truly, Nicholas Arthur, is now available at Amazon. Secrets of the Rapture. Be informed. edified, and grow in the faith as your spirit is daily nourished in a biblical worldview, because you love the truth. FirstAmendmentRadio.net/MOPI. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God. Always listenable, at work or on the go. FirstAmendmentRadio.net/MOBI. No download or app necessary.